It's been a week since the 2022 midterm election, and more data is pouring in about who voted for who and how it's split between parties, Republicans and Democrats. Latest data shows that Gen Z voted Democrat by a 28% margin. So, what can the Republican Party do to win over more of Gen Z? Welcome to another episode of Counter Thought. Midterms are over. It's been a week. More and more data is coming in. More and more is being revealed to us about how each cohort, each demographic voted in these past elections. And the one that I'm focusing on in this episode is Gen Z. Now, if you've been following the podcast for any length of time, you may have picked up on the fact that Gen Z is the generation that I'm focused on. I am a millennial, Generation Y, but I have had multiple Gen Z guests on the podcast. And also Gen Z is growing as, a percentage of the voting population in this country. Baby boomers are the largest, but, they are getting to the age where they are phasing out as they are reaching their late 60s, 70s. And I think the oldest of the baby boomers are now creeping up to 80 years old. But Gen Z is growing. Gen Z is 1997 to 2012. So they range anywhere from 25 years old all the way down to 10 years old. And those 10-year-olds, 11-year-olds, all the way up to 17-year-olds, they will be voting in the next election. And well, not all of them, but they will be voting in 2024, 2026, 2028. So Gen Z is very important. And Gen Z is unlike any other voting population, more closest to millennials like myself. But Gen X, baby boomers, they are different than Gen Z. And in episode 43, I had a wonderful guest, Noelle Pullen. I'm going to have her on in the near future, but she and I talked about Gen Z conservatives, Gen Z and the conservative movement. One of the things we talked about in that episode was, what can the GOP, the Republican Party, do to win over or to be more appealing to Gen Z? Because Gen Z, some stats about them. Gen Z, again, born in 1997 to between 2012. Gen Z consists of 68 million people based on the 2020 census, which is 21% of the US population. Gen Z is also, in the 2020 election, was 10% of eligible voters. And of Gen Z, only 31% are Republicans. Now, as I said in the open, Gen Z, it's coming out, the data is showing that Gen Z voted Democrat over Republican by a 28-point margin. So we're talking about, like a 72 to, was that 44 split as an example. So what can the Republican Party do to bring more of Gen Z to be part of the Republican Party? Again, going back to episode 43 with Noelle, we talked about this. And one of the things I brought up to her in that episode was the fact that there was an editorial that I had read leading up to that episode from the New York Post. It was written by a Gen Z college student, and the writer summarized the Republican Party as how it can appeal to Gen Z in this way. Quote, "The GOP should work on rebranding as the modern, reasonable, solutions-oriented party." And that's key. Reasonable, solution-oriented party. And I'll get to that in a second of why that's so critical to the Republican Party and Gen Z moving forward. But first, again, Gen Z is very important to me. Gen Z is doing a lot of wonderful things. The Gen Z conservatives are fantastic and doing fantastic things for the party. It is very encouraging to see so many young individuals, coming of age into adulthood, being young adults, young business professionals, and teenagers and everything, and speaking up and standing up for their values, getting involved in politics, getting involved in the culture, and trying to move it forward, advance it forward for the good of our country. That is something I did not do when I was, 16, 17, 18, early 20s. I started following politics, I guess, when I got to college. So I'd have been 18 years old, but I definitely wasn't doing anything at 16. I had a guest, Anna Morris, the Wake Up Conservative, in episode 66. And she is way younger than I was when I started following politics. And then I had Nikki, or Red Girl in a Blue World. She was episode 64. Again, another conservative female, just like Anna, speaking out, doing wonderful things, in her own podcast, in their own podcast for Gen Z conservatives. And then Erica Holzer was episode 59, and we talked about education in that episode. So that's 4 episodes that I've dedicated, with a Gen Z guest, and then I've had some just solos by myself talking about cultural things that are important to Gen Z, and not just Gen Z, but the conservative movement as a whole. But the Republican Party, this is one area where they continue to miss, and I talk about this in a couple other episodes. So the Republican Party, to me, can be very dismissive of certain issues that stretch across party lines, and they can be very black and white. And to me, I believe the Republican Party needs to have a little bit or a lot more gray, and also come across as a little more compassionate when it comes to certain things. A couple of those issues that stretch across party lines: climate change, or global warming, however you want to phrase it. It used to be climate change, and now it's global warming. It flips however it needs to flip, based on the year. But climate change, student debt forgiveness, pediatric transgender surgery, and abortion laws. To me, those are 4 that stretch across party lines. I dedicated an entire episode about student debt forgiveness. And in that episode, I talked about how the Republican Party comes off as cold and heartless. Their talking point, and even the pundits, not just those who are running for office, or the leaders within the GOP, or those are the leaders of the RNC, they all come across as cold. The messaging comes across as cold and heartless, in my opinion. For student debt forgiveness, the argument is, that gender studies is not going to get you a job that's going to pay for your $80,000, $100,000 worth of debt that you racked up by going to some liberal art school that cost you 30, 40 grand a year. That's not the right talking point. I myself, in that episode and on other instances, like on my Instagram lives and other things like that, have talked about my current student debt situation. I didn't go to school, some private school, and get a gender studies degree or an art degree or something like that. I got a sport management degree, which is basically a business degree for sports. And then I got a master's. In hindsight, probably didn't need the master's, but I was graduating undergrad during the 2008 recession. And I remember reading an article saying, like, hey, if you're ever going to go get an advanced degree, now would be the time to do it. And I was like, hey, this is a way to separate myself from others who graduating with a bachelor's. So jobs aren't that great right now. I'm going to go get an advanced degree. Okay, but that's not like a gender studies degree. In sports, because of the demand and everything, it's a very low paying job. I don't work in sports anymore. But just to say, anyone who needs student debt forgiveness isn't a Republican. They're not concerned about that. They don't need that relief. This is just all these, crazy liberals who are in their 20s and early 30s and stuff like that, who got these, valueless, pointless degrees at a private institution and racked up $100,000 worth of student debt. Well, no, that's not the case. And when the messaging is like that from the Republican Party and the Republican pundits, it does no good. Student loan forgiveness stretches across party lines. There are kids like myself on the right who have student loans, and it has been a burden, trying to set up their future, family, their financial situation, all of that. So that's just one example. The Republican Party seems to be dismissive and black and white, like either you need it or you don't. And they need to sprinkle in some gray. The messaging that comes from the comes from the Republican Party needs to be more of understanding, empathy. Show some heart. Don't come across as cold and just like so too bad, so sad. You get what you get. Don't pitch a fit kind of attitude. Be more understanding. The messaging, for an example of student loan forgiveness, should be okay. We may not agree with the forgiveness aspect, especially forgiveness coming from the federal government, even though it is the federal government that created the problem. Let's focus on the solution. The messaging should be more of, hey, for student loan forgiveness, let's go after the colleges, the universities who have, I think the current estimate is about 700 billion with a B billion dollars in endowments across the country that are not taxed. Not taxed. Tax them, right? You tax them, use that tax money, and then use that tax money in forgiveness. Change the system, change the way student loans are given out, distributed, and approved. Take the federal government out of that. Make these institutions, these colleges, universities have skin in the game, right? Talk about a solution. Going back to that quote that I read a few minutes ago from that New York Post editorial, the Republican Party should work on rebranding as the modern, reasonable, solutions-oriented party. Reasonable, solutions-oriented party. Offer solutions. When it comes to climate change or global warming, don't just say, this is a bunch of crap. Don't buy into everything that you're being told. California is doing crazy things over there with outlawing new fossil fuel, new gas powered vehicles by, I think it's 2032 or something like that, from being sold in their state. Don't just say like, oh, black and white again, heartless. No, sometimes you'll hear it from the Republican Party. You'll hear, we need to have an honest conversation. We need to talk about, okay, maybe we need to move away from fossil fuels, move away from gas, move, all of that, and embrace electric at the same time. Even Elon Musk, Tesla, the leader in electric vehicles, has said the United States is not set up to just do, a cold stop, hard stop, and shift completely to electric vehicles. The infrastructure isn't there. The resources aren't there yet. So let's have an honest conversation, a solutions-oriented conversation, and say, hey, we agree we need to do better for the environment. One of the ways we can do better is X, Y, Z. But let's not just, stop cold turkey. Let's, cross over, phase one out while phasing another in. That would be a reasonable solutions-oriented discussion. Something that can actually be looked at and hopefully understood. And be like, oh, you know what? This makes sense to me. This is actually someone being honest and not just not just dismissing something because they don't agree with it. Let's find an honest solution. And then when it comes to other topics, such as I mentioned pediatric transgender surgeries, I'm not saying to like just not stand on your principles, on your morals, on your values, anything like that. I'm not saying just throw those to the wayside, but there are topics that stretch across party lines, issues that stretch across party lines that need to have these solutions-oriented discussions. Like pediatric transgender surgery, I don't believe any of these children should be having surgery. But instead of just taking that stance as a Republicans and the pundits and the elected officials and those who will be running for office in the future, I would suggest the way they should speak about it should be, I don't believe that, children, under 18, right, should be having these surgeries. But those who believe that they do need to have these surgeries, we need to have things put in place so that they can get the counseling and the mental help that they need to work through what is going on, gender dysphoria, whatever else is going on psychologically, before they make or decide to make a life-changing decision. Let that be your talking point. Let that be the talking point. Don't say, oh, we're just going to outlaw it, which I agree. Shouldn't be allowed, right? Under 18, shouldn't be allowed. But that shouldn't be the talking point. The talking point should focus more on how can we help these individuals, because we've seen a recent upswing by, I think, like a 10x or maybe more, like frequency, popularity of this whole like transgender mindset amongst uh, children. But don't just be dismissive. Don't be black and white. Focus on a solution oriented policy, a solution oriented approach. And then another one with abortion laws. That is another one where, to me, I don't think, abortion should be legal, but it's now back to the states. That's what the Supreme Court decided. The timing of it from a political standpoint and a strategy standpoint before the midterms didn't work out well for the Republican Party. The Republican Party underestimated, and even the polls underestimated, how much the turnout was going to be influenced by abortion and Roe v. Wade being overturned. It data is showing that I think it's by like 70 to 30%, so like a 40 point margin. Single women between ages, I believe it was like 24 to 45, voted Democrat, and the leading issue in that instant, or for that cohort, for that demographic, is abortion and abortion laws. So the Republican Party, I would say that their stance should have been, and then now moving forward, should be focusing on, this is for the states. It's left up to the states. And then that kind of gets, the senators out of it, if the senators can keep quiet, and focuses more on your state Congress and everything else, your representatives and your state senators and your governor. And then also, if you are trying to be more of a moderate Republican, making sure, and a lot of the states already have this in place, but if you are going to say no to abortion, maybe your carve out is rape and incest, right? Right. But this is another topic, just like the other three, where you need to have a solutions oriented approach, not just come out guns blazing, dropping the hammer down, saying like, no way, no how. Have a solutions oriented approach that people can understand and make their decision upon. Because Gen Z, again, is going to continue to grow. Gen Z, 1997, so 25 years old, to 2012, just 10 years old, right? 97, 25 to 10. A majority of the Gen Z population hasn't even voted yet. Has not even voted yet. So the Republican Party needs to get a message, a solutions-oriented message in place starting today. They missed out for the 2022 midterms, which is not good. Not good. But moving forward, you got to look forward, right? You can't go back to the past. All you can do is learn from the past, and you got to keep moving forward. So for 2024, there has to be a solutions-oriented message, a solutions-oriented platform from the Republican Party that speaks to Gen Z. There is a big portion of Gen Z that is already locked in with the Republican Party. I mentioned that's 31% of those registered voters. But again, that is less than half of Gen Z who is able to vote. So as these younger ones come up, that were born, let me do some quick math. So they couldn't vote in 2022, so they had to be born from 2005 to 2012. Like that 7-year gap or 7-year range right there. What are they going to be interested in? What is going to matter to them? Need to stay in tune with Gen Z and get the messaging in line with them, because they're going to continue to grow and be a larger and larger voting bloc moving forward. So Republicans, again, they need to spell out their solutions, and the solutions need to have some gray, not just be black and white. And one thing I believe, this is a theory of mine, one reason why you saw a lot of Gen Z, and also this goes into, again, that the single women, believe it was between ages 20 and 45, and a lot of independents, more independents voted for Democrats than Republicans. I believe whenever certain things such as transgenderism, student debt forgiveness, abortion laws, whenever you are taking something away, or it is perceived that you are taking something away, voters are, or just even if you aren't a voter, taking this outside of politics, outside of elections, if someone is trying to take something away from you that you believe is rightfully yours, you are more likely to dig in and fight to preserve that right, that belonging, that thing that you believe you own, than if it is not threatened to be taken away. And coming back into the politics, what I mean, and for elections, what I mean is, you could, 70% of people say they don't like the way the country is going. You would expect there would have been a lot more Republicans voted into office because the Democrats are currently in power, on the federal level. But we didn't see that in the 2022 midterms. So what does that tell me? That tells me, I believe, that whenever you look at the certain issues, if something was threatened to be taken away, a voter will sacrifice, and I talked about this a couple episodes ago, single issue voters, things like that, or people like that, that if something is being threatened to taken away, it will override the other issues that are bothering those same voters that might have taken them to vote for the other party. So a Democrat wanting to vote Republican because maybe they don't like the economy, they don't like the crime. But if you're threatening to take a right, what is perceived to be a right, such as in this case, abortion, away from them, as an example, student debt forgiveness, things like that, they are going to dig in their heels, sacrifice, wanting to make a change for the economy or crime and law and order in order to preserve what they have in place already, something, that single issue. And I believe that happened across a couple of these voting demographics, a couple of these voting cohorts, that they might have been, oh man, like, I'm going to vote Republican this time because I don't like how the Democrats are doing X, Y, and Z. Oh, wait, but the Republican Party wants to take this away from me. No. This is more important to me. I will sacrifice X, Y, and Z in order to preserve A. And then I believe that is how, one of the ways in which the Republican Party lost so many of not only these Gen Z voters, but also that would get into older millennials, and then even the very young Gen Xers when you look at the single women between 20 years old and 45 years old. I think that's one of the things that happened. They saw a threat that something was going to be taken away, i.e. abortion, and they decided to sacrifice the other issues that they might have felt a Republican could do better with in order to preserve something that they cherish, that single issue. And that needs to be avoided. That needs to be understood by the Republican Party, and then try to avoid that wherever possible. And again, I think you can avoid that. You can dance around it if you offer these solutions-oriented messaging, be a solutions-oriented party, and sprinkle in the gray instead of just being black and white. So the 2022 midterms, get a little tongue-tied there, are in the books. Well, actually, I guess there's maybe a couple more seats left to be decided, but finally, a week later, the 2022 midterms are in the books. And now the focus flips to 2024. There's been talks for the Republican Party being leadership changes within the Senate, potentially leadership changes within the House, leadership changes potentially at the RNC. Ronna McDaniel, should she be challenged as leadership? Should Trump run? All these things. So 2022, put it in the rearview mirror, learn from it, but now the focus has to move to 2024. How can the Republicans build upon the seats that they did gain at the state level and federal level and grow that in 2024, and ultimately taking the presidency away from Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and putting in a Republican in 2024? How can that be accomplished? That needs to be the focus now. And Gen Z needs to be a big part of that. Sure, they were only 10% of the vote in 2020, but again, they are growing because the baby boomers are phasing out. Gen Z is having more of them are coming of age, voting age, 18 years old. moving from 2020 to 2022 to 2024 is continuing to grow. It needs to be a focus of the Republican Party. And there needs to be an understanding of how the Republican Party can invite more people in without expanding the tent too much. You don't want to sacrifice your principles, your values, but you want to be able to find ways to invite more people into your tent to grow the Republican Party, to make more changes, to take more seats, and ultimately the presidency in 2024. Hi, I'm Brian Kletter, the creator and host of the Counterthought podcast. Thank you for watching this video. Remember to like it, and then also check out these two videos and subscribe to the channel. For more daily content from me, you can find me on Instagram at Counterthought CEO and the official Counterthought Instagram page at counter_thought. Thank you for watching, and spread the word.